Gavor. Chapter 19 is about creating and evolving a technology roadmap. Again, I'm wondering if in this chapter, the 2015 data publication is a little bit behind the times, but I think I might be behind the times as well. So I will react to the content here and give my own perspective, as no doubt I've done in the previous 18 presentations in this class. So the challenge is, if we're looking to build a technology roadmap, the architecture is continuously changing and evolving, so that the roadmap must be an ongoing process. We have to look at where we're at now, where we want to be, where the market is going, and how we're going to adapt and change and invest. As the second point says, there's many masters here. There's vendors that are changing things. There's boards of professional societies and international standard boards that set different standards. And sometimes you're trading partners. If you're in a retail business, it seems like it used to be in the late 1990s and 2000s, it was Walmart that was setting the trends for what all of their suppliers had to follow, and the competitors. And now in the 2010s and 2020s, it seems to be Amazon doing the same. And then there could be unexpected roadblocks might occur. I mean, I'm recording this on June 14th, 2020, which means we're just in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. And what an unexpected roadblock that has been for many companies, and moved and skidded their IT focus and systems and in different directions, minimally just making sure that people can work remotely and have collaboration tools such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams to continue working. So, if you don't have a plan, if you don't have some strategy that you're looking at and trying to follow, so that's what a technology roadmap kind of is from an IT standpoint, you might make suboptimal decisions. And there's a quote here, I guess: plans are nothing, planning is everything. What is a saying we used to have? Your inability to plan properly does not constitute an emergency on my part. So hopefully, pay some time and look at the planning. Look at 2-3 years out, see where you want to go and where you want to be company-wise. So the process, of course, starts with what they did and what they are doing, what failed, and what could improve. And sometimes the ideas in the past that failed are now more possible in the future. I keep hearing, we tried that once in 2005 and it didn't work. Well, you might have been premature, and maybe in 2020 or 2021 it does work. So it also puts some guardrails on the path you're taking to limit, you don't have an open field of things you can consider. You've kind of narrowed it down to what you're trying to really do. So and in doing the process, whenever you do some sort of strategic planning, which is kind of what this is in IT, in the area of information technology, is the people that help and work and approve the plan have some collective buy-in. That's so important. It's not just my plan, it's our plan. We've all agreed to it. And if you document it properly, we know why we've all agreed to it, and we know what trade-offs we made in setting and agreeing to the plan. So, as the second point says, yes, it's a mechanism for identification, justification, planned evolution, and orchestration of a strategic plan for technology. And in essence, it's there to enhance business performance. So you want to reinforce that business IT partnership. Um, if you're talking about the external benefits and effectiveness of a roadmap, well, you have to take into account your business goals, and you identify your business goals between the plan and the current technology environment, and see where it is that technology could help you achieve your business goals. It reduces complexity by reducing the number and variety of choices. We've already talked about that. Enhances the interoperability of business functionality across lines of business. Interoperability, that's a word that you don't see used often. But I think what happens is technology does provide a certain sameness and a certain globalness. If we think of shared service organizations, it's that interoperability. It's the ability to manage really larger, more complex parts of your business with a small staff centrally located. It increases flexibility, increases speed of implementation because you have some common standards. I mean, and one of the common standards should be we're trying to use as much functionality in our ERP system as humanly possible, based on the offerings and add-ons that the ERP company is actually providing, which is why people, pick an SAP or Oracle platform. I'm thinking Fortune 500 companies, and stick with it, and more or less use that functionality rather than getting third-party bolt-ons, even though both still happen. You want to preserve, and doing that, you preserve the investment in your existing systems, and you're counting on SAP and Oracle, for example, being at the cutting edge or good enough edge of the expanding markets, and they're big enough that I think a dream of many startup companies that are doing new functionality and new applications and new this and that is to get SAP or Oracle to actually buy them out, and they would have a big payday, a big bonus day for the work that they put in. And lastly, you have that established framework that you're moving forward with. You focus your investment dollars. We've talked about that almost every week. Almost every presentation has talked about how to focus and prioritize your IT investment dollars. Obviously, if you have to respond to new legislation and you have a bona fide, well-known, adaptive ERP system that your company is working with, like SAP or Oracle, they're going to respond to the new legislation, maybe in tandem working with you if you're at the cutting edge with them. But if not, you can pretty much count on they're going to take care of those kinds of things. You reduce the difficulty associated with getting new technology and using new suppliers and new platforms and new applications and adding complexity. So this is a way to get some simplicity by focusing yourself in one ERP family orientation. Like I said, people don't usually switch. It's got to be in fact, I've never really seen a study or an example of large companies, for sure, that switch from SAP to Oracle or to something else. So you have a common focal point. I don't know if it's a design point. And you're trying to facilitate and maintain an end-to-end integration of usable components and applications. That's the key. We saw in that case from, I think it was week 4. Which one was it? I think it was I can't remember the case now. I'm thumbing through the book. Give me a chance here. it was that grocery chain that had so many different applications, and their data was a complete mess. And yeah, it was a consumerization of technology at IFG. That if you don't do it, you end up with a problem like that company had. So you want a consistent, cohesive technology base that creates a critical mass of skills. And you don't have every division or business unit putting their own apps and creating their own databases, etc. That adds to complexity, and basically you can't even define what in stock means. It's incredible. It can be, to define it easily as in English, it's like it's either on the shelf or it's not. But to define it explicitly in an ERP system is not so easy. I mean, it takes some work to do. And same thing for on-time orders and complete orders and all that. When do you take the snapshot? When do you decide if what an on-time order is, a complete order is, an in-stock item is, an out-of-stock item is? I mean, you could have had, when you picked an order, it's not in stock, but it's in the warehouse. What does that mean? How can it be in the warehouse but not be in stock? If you're picking the order in the warehouse, well, you could have just unloaded it off a truck. So it's in your warehouse, but the status is still in a put away status. It's been loaded off the truck and recorded into your inventory almost immediately because everything's barcoded. But the fact that it's sitting in a dock bay waiting to be put away means it's not a picking location. It can't be picked. So it's technically out of stock and in stock at the same time. So where do you draw that line? How do you make those decisions? Do you make the loading docks a storage location? Probably a bad idea, because if you sent someone there to get it and they were already putting the stock away, and it's, even though it's all in the system, it just is probably more confusing and harder to manage than worthwhile. All right, I spent a lot of time on that slide. What are the internal benefits of a roadmap? Well, again, part of the reason when I looked at that, I like that IFG case, because I think you want, and one of my solutions there was to provide a phased, what are their gaps? What is a phased approach to closing those gaps and getting to be more competitive with GPL, which was their major competitor? You want to have global solutions and make sure that if you do have local technologies, they're limited in a way that they can be synchronized and synergized and synthesized into the global solution. You can lower the cost of development and maintenance by spending your money wisely, because it will have broad application than letting everybody spend maybe lesser amounts of money, but you will spend more of it and not have a global solution. So if we look at this, there's 7 principles in this process. There's seven activities involved in this current technology and the business plan. There's some guiding principles. There's access or assess current technology, analyze the gap, evaluate technology landscape, describe future technology, outline mitigation strategy, and establish governance. If you look at a picture this way, this is basically your classic gap analysis. You're using these activities to come up with a technology roadmap. But you start off with the current state, and you look at where the business initiatives and drivers are and where technology is headed and where you want your business to go. That creates a gap. You do a gap analysis. This gap drives the roadmap, and you're going to look at the things and prioritize them in the order that gives you the most bang for the buck. bang for the buck being return on investment. So guiding principles: establish a statement of the role and purpose of technology within the business, how technology supports the business, and define the overall technology support to be delivered with a sense of performance. I think knowing the most important one here to me is probably defining how technology supports the business. They're all important. Number two seems more important to me. You want to establish your investment boundaries. We've talked about that almost every week too. And prioritize it. What is your investment budget? How are you going to spend that money? What are your return on investment thresholds or hurdles that you have to cross to justify it? And you're going to pick the ones that get you the most. And by talking about it, you have a collective knowledge of how that works. You want to outline the role of technology for the organization. So here, we've talked about this also. Are we a fast follower, or are we a cutting or bleeding edge new adapter of anything that comes out? Really, it has to do with the risk and excitement that the senior management of the company wants to have. Some guys want to be more cowboys and want to say, let's get the latest and greatest and stay ahead of everybody. Other people say, let's be a little bit cautious, but when we commit to it full force, and we catch up and surpass perhaps the fast follow, the immediate implementers of anything new. Also, outline the role of technology within industry. Well, some industries are more staid, and technology is kind of like stable and not probably changing it much. Or you could be in a retail environment where it's changing dramatically. Even year to year, I teach a course called Marketing Channels and Supply Chain for undergraduates, and it's surprising. In the fifth year, this will be the sixth year I'm teaching it. The IT is driving a lot of this, and the focus changes a little bit every year. There's not a sameness to this problem, and oftentimes it's led by the innovation of what Amazon does. So you want to reinforce the role of standards. So we want to, of course, adhere to industry standards, but we also want to adhere to our own standards as much as possible, always keeping an eye out that maybe our own standards or our own objectives, kicking the tires and making sure they're still valid, and that technology doesn't change in a way that renders you uncompetitive. Example of key principles. Okay, we will assist employees with technology problems that occur via call centers, desktop support, self-help, or self-level agreements. I mean, when I think about a call center and I call and you have a 20-minute wait, I hate that. I want to, slit my wrists. But when they tell me, would you like us to call you back? And they spit out my phone number and when the next available operator is ready. Oh, I love that. Then I can go do something else. I don't have to listen to their music. And boom, they call me back, and I'm like, please, I can do something else. I feel like I'm freed by that. It's a small thing. Outline development preference. We will buy first, build second. What does that mean? So rather are we in the IT development business, or are we in the let's make use of commercial products as much as we can? There are some companies, and you're probably not going to know who they are because they're not advertising it, that may have proprietary software that gives them a competitive edge. And the fact that they don't sell it, you don't know it, that they might be doing it. And there's some companies that have grown some homegrown MRP, material resource planning, or transportation management software that may be as good or better for their specific business than what's commercially available. Establish expectations. Service levels and availability are outlined for all production systems. We will be security and privacy compliant. That's such a huge thing. I think now everybody's looking at that. And not only do we want to be security and privacy compliant, we want to be locked down as much as possible. Specify the time frame. the future in our technology has a 3 to 5 year horizon. Maybe technology people are only looking at 1 year ahead of time, or maybe 2 years ahead of time. Strategic planning gets a little murky in most companies if you go past the next fiscal year. A lot of budgeting, what they call strategic planning, is after you finish the budget for the next fiscal year, then it's say, okay, it's time to do a strategic plan. And basically they add 2 more years or 3 more years to the budget. And basically it's linear extensions of all the budget trends from the past couple of years into the next 3 years. And okay, we've done strategic planning, when in fact they really haven't. So know if you're fooling yourself or not fooling yourself in that regard. You want to assess your current technology. Well, what do we have? You know, again, I'm going back to that IFG case. They barely knew what they had in every year. You know, they had to do that. They had to go through and create that roadmap and map to find out what it is they had and what they didn't have. They had so many different things in their company, it was not clear. And then you want to assign an owner who's responsible for each technology domain, who's the business lead and who's the IT lead for those things, and making sure you have the right relationships with vendors, the right training, the right documentation. What are the best practices that we're trying to implement across our company? Then you want to analyze the gaps. Well, you perform a gap analysis between current technology and what is needed. You know, what is the as-is process? What is the to-be business process? What is the gap? Are there technologies that cover that or not? Do we need to build it in-house? Can we buy it from the outside? You identify the technology, build the technology in anticipation of business change and growth, and you need a plan to bridge these gaps, how you're going to solve it. And oftentimes it may be a phased plan. Then you may have an aspiration for which there's no solution currently, maybe only a partial solution, and you may have to revise what your to-be process and world is going to look like. So firms have to invest in R&D to keep abreast. Even if you're not developing the technology yourself, you have to have kind of an R&D mindset. I've used the example of Colgate-Palmolive before. They worked with SAP in the early 2000s to come up with new functionality that what was R3 then, I think it's now SAP HANA now, didn't have, that they thought would be needed. And basically, if Colgate needed it, most other large companies needed it. And they were able to, it was a win-win situation. Colgate got what they want by being the helping SAP develop it. They got it for low cost. And then that was their pay for contributing, their contribution to that development. And then SAP was able to sell it to everybody else. So the size of the investment and the ROI is critical to this process. And that's what basically the last two steps, 2 points here say. How much will it cost you, and what is the ROI? Therefore, is it a project we want to do, or is it a project we need to do? If it's a project we need to do, you may need to take, you may have to settle for a lesser ROI, because if you don't do it, the decrease on not investing in your sales could be more than the return on the investment. So if it's something you have to do to stay in the game and stay competitive, you have to know that. So I think we already covered this. We described what the future should look like and what the future technologies are. Is there technology that can fulfill that now? Are other companies, our business partners and vendors working on it now? Do we need to develop it ourselves? and you make a choice in that regard. So, and then your mitigation strategy. That's closing the gap. Do you want to do the two common strategies are the gradual evolution or phased implementation or the Big Bang? I go back to that IFG case. They didn't have the money to do the Big Bang, so they had to do some sort of phased implementation. One of the big challenges here is to assign the priorities. How do you assign the priorities? But we've talked about that a lot. I use ROI as because the companies I've worked in have used ROI, consumer packaged goods companies have used ROI to do this prioritization. And then governance. What is governance? Governance is a relationship between the business and IT. And on the business side, you have the operational people, the people that are running the business. You have the finance side, which are also running, but also providing some sort of fiscal governance of the business. And that's the real bridge between IT and the business tends to be finance, because they're looking at your IT expenditure, they're looking at what the business needs, and they're trying to maintain that fiscal integrity in both camps, both the IT and the business camp. So that's a partnership that you're trying to get to govern this, make the right priorities, make sure you have the right return on investments, and then you can have a plan on what you want to do. So practical steps in developing a roadmap. They say be bold and innovative when planning the roadmap. I think certainly in your brainstorming activity you can be and should be. Nothing is off, it should not be put up on the board for consideration. You want to use this to further align technology with the business. If you're already well aligned, you want to increase that alignment. If the alignment is not doing, is almost non-existent, like maybe at that IFG, in that IFG case, you want to use this as the vehicle to begin aligning IT and the business. Well, by involving the right people, any team-based exercise and planning activity is, the reason you do it on a team basis is to have people sitting in the room so they can see how the trade-offs were made, what was important to senior management, not, and therefore have buy-in. The easiest thing to do is not be part of a meeting, hear the results, and criticize it like crazy. They say don't forget the people. Well, if the people don't buy in to what you're trying to do, a friend of mine always talks about cave people, cave being citizens against virtually everything. People get stuck in their way of doing things, and change is tough. So you've got to find out, you've got to take that into consideration as well. And then as you're implementing the roadmap, you want to control, you want to measure, you want to communicate progress. All of that is important, and we've covered that before. We want to mitigate from a production-centric to process-centric applications architecture using service-based architecture. And that's a little bit too IT for all of us, but there's an appendix you can look at there. But what you want to do is it's really about business processes, I think, is the point here. You want to deploy components, applications to minimize costs. You want to do more with less is the goal always. And you want components based on industry standards, because if there are standards that you have to follow, you don't want your own series of barcodes and your own barcode system. If you're in a consumer packaged good, you want to adhere to the international standards, the ISO barcode system. There's no two ways about it. You want to utilize middleware and minimize application changes. I'm not sure what they mean by that, but middleware. These are things that the people can't see, but are important to that happen in the background. And the middleware could be some of these industry standard things that people just take for granted as they're doing their daily work. So that middleware is what's happening in the background. And how do you manage your inventory? How do you do your forecasting? What methodologies and things? If it does it automatically for you, you should have some idea of what it is and what it's doing. So in conclusion, the purpose of this roadmap is basically a strat plan for the development of technology in an organization. And the technology roadmap communicates the role of technology will play in advancing the business goals. Again, we're talking about that relationship between IT and the business. This has got to solidify it. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.